So it's actually been quite some time since I've done a legit install on this car, but today we are installing this guy right here. This is the IAG Street Series air oil separator for the 2015 and 2016 WRX. If you have a 17 or newer WRX or an SCI, the install is going to be a little bit different. Now, a couple things to note before we actually jump into the install process. I highly suggest you guys go to the IAG website and either print off a set of install instructions or have them readily available on your computer while you're doing this install, because there are a lot of steps, and if you don't have that, it's going to be easy to get frustrated. Second, this car does have modifications that are going to change the install process of this, like a front mount intercooler and an EGR delete kit. So if you have either a stock car or a car without similar modifications, it's going to be a little bit different, but I'll try to point out those differences as we go through the process. Also, if you haven't already seen the catch can versus AOS video, I will link that up above. Pretty sure it's in this corner. That video is going to show you what these actually do and why you would want one. That being said, let's start with the install. The first thing we're going to need to do is remove the engine cover and the intake duct. No idea where our engine cover is, but both of these are held in with just some pop clips, so once you have those out, you can remove those two items. You're also going to want to disconnect the negative battery terminal, and then we will be removing this passenger side radiator fan. There are two 10mm bolts up top here, and then a connector on the bottom that you'll need to disconnect. Once you have that disconnected and the bolts out, you can just slide this up. The next thing we need to do is remove your top mount intercooler and your charge pipe. But like I said earlier, this car has a front mount intercooler, so we won't be doing that. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is loosen up some clamps, and then there are a couple bolts that are holding in the top mount intercooler. As for the charge pipe, there should be two 12mm bolts holding that in. Once you have the intercooler and charge pipe removed, you're going to remove the two pop clips that are holding in your breather pipe here, and then you're going to need a pair of long needle nose pliers like these to reach down and undo the clip so you can slide the pipe out. Then you can follow it all the way to the other side and undo that clip and remove this pipe. We're going to move to the back of the engine now and remove your EGR pipe. Now, I did an EGR delete on this, so there is no pipe back here, but it would be in this area right here. There's going to be four 12mm bolts holding that in place. Once you have that off, we're going to work on the PCV hose. So grab your needle nose pliers again, and we're going to slide this hose off of the PCV valve. Once you have that hose off, you want to take the included 90-degree fitting and slide it inside, and then reapply the OEM clamp. And we're going to set that aside, and we're going to be removing the PCV valve right here with a 19mm socket. Then we can install the new barbed fitting into that same threaded hole, and we'll tighten that down to 15 foot-pounds with a torque wrench. Okay. Moving over to the ECU, we're going to remove 4 wiring harness retainers from the ECU bracket. There's going to be one holding this in right here, one right here, there's one down here, and then one tucked back here, which I really can't show you, but grab a pair of needle nose pliers and unclip those. Now we're going to take a 10mm socket and remove the two nuts that are holding the ECU to the bracket, one on top and one on the bottom. With those two nuts removed, we can slide the ECU out, and you can kind of tuck this away so you have room to work on the bracket. You can zip tie this to your AC lines if you want, but I'm just going to tuck it back here so it's out of the way. Before you tuck the ECU away, there is a 10mm bolt that holds this bracket in place that also has a wiring harness retaining clip installed onto it. Go ahead and remove that 10mm bolt and the clip and remove the bracket. I think I mentioned that there were 4 retaining clips holding those wiring harnesses in place. I actually missed one. There's 2 down here, so make that 5. Anyway, there are 2 10mm bolts that are holding in this ECU bracket. Go ahead and remove those, and then you can slide the bracket out. Now, just below the bracket we removed, you're going to see this ground wire here, and there is a small black plug underneath it. Go ahead and pop that plug out, and we're going to relocate this ground wire to that hole that is plugged with this black plastic cover. You are going to need to pull out the retaining clip right here before you're able to move the ground wire down. This is just a 10mm bolt, and you'll need a pair of needle nose pliers to pull that retaining clip out. So I got that ground wire relocated to the bottom hole. I'm not going to lie, that retaining clip that was holding it in place was a bit of a nightmare to remove because you can't get to the other side of it, so you kind of have to just He-Man it. I went ahead and cut the clip off because we're not going to use that. Now you're going to take the relocation bracket that's included, and you're going to reuse the 2 10mm bolts that held the original ECU bracket in place, and you're going to install this into the hole where the ground wire used to be, and then this hole right here, which the ECU bracket used. Now we can take the included hex bolts and the original nuts that held the ECU to the ECU bracket, and we're going to relocate it to the bracket that we just installed. I would suggest doing the bottom hole first and then installing the bolt in the upper hole, because that's going to be a lot easier than working your way down. Once you have your ECU secured, we're going to start working on getting the AOS put together, starting with the coolant lines, which are the hoses with the threaded fittings pre-installed. The short one is going to go on the bottom of the AOS, and the longer one is going to go to the top here. Then, if I flip this over, you're going to take a look at the mounting bracket that you'll need to install with the included 3 Allen bolts. To align this, you're going to have 2 holes on the top and bottom of this, and then you can tighten this down, and we'll move back over to the car. Right above the ECU, you're going to see 2 10mm nuts that are holding in this bracket that have 2 harnesses clipped into place. Go ahead and remove the 2 nuts and unclip the harnesses and remove that bracket. With that bracket removed, you've got one more harness clip that you need to pop out, which is this one right here. And then you're going to push this harness down to make room for the AOS. The next step requires you to bend these 2 brake lines up and these 3 brake lines back to make room for the AOS. Now, it says to use a crowbar to carefully bend these up, but I don't have one of those to sneak in here, so I'm going to carefully use my fingers to kind of just easily bend these up. Now, we'll just start with a slight bend for now and see if we need any more once we have it installed. And then we'll push these 3 back. Now, honestly, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue, so we'll see how it looks once we get it installed. So I guess they changed this, but don't be like me and forget to install the breather hose onto the AOS before installing it onto the car. It said in the instructions that this was already pre-installed on the car, but I failed to realize that it isn't before I installed this, so I'm going to have to thread this on with it being on the car. Not a big deal. So now we're going to install the AOS using 2 mounting holes on the strut tower here with the supplied M6 bolts. Make sure before you do this you have enough clearance all around. Also, you're going to tuck the hoses underneath this wiring harness right here. Next, you're going to want to pinch off this hose right here, which connects your turbo to the engine coolant port, as well as the lower coolant hose that connects to your EGR tube. This is going to help prevent any coolant loss while you pull this tube off. So go ahead and take some needle nose pliers and undo that clamp. And be mindful that when you do pull this off, there may be some coolant that comes out, so be ready to get that cleaned up. Then we can loosen the clamp on the top portion of the hose we just pulled off, so we can rotate it about 90 degrees to fit it with the lower coolant hose on the air oil separator. Once you have that rotated, you can reapply the clamp. Once we have that hose rotated and connected to the lower coolant hose on the AOS, go ahead and reapply the OEM clamp, and we'll move on to the top coolant hose that will route down to the turbo coolant port. Now you're going to want to install the included hose clamp onto this top coolant hose, and we're going to slide it onto the turbo coolant port right here. Once you have that on there, go ahead and apply that hose clamp. With those hoses where they need to be, you can remove the pinch pliers. Now we're going to take what I'm going to call the wishbone hose right here, which has sort of a 90-degree short hose on the end and then two longer hoses on these ends. You want to take the shorter of those two hoses and thread the short one through the hole in this bracket right here until you are able to take that 90-degree short hose and put it on the barb fitting that we threaded in earlier. Once you have that hose onto the barb fitting, go ahead and get a zip tie on there and tighten that up, and then we will route the other two hoses. The shorter of the two hoses is going to route to the bottom port on your AOS. The longer one you're going to want to route underneath your AC line here to the middle port on your AOS. And then you can go ahead and also cap off the bottom port and then get that zip tied along with all the other hoses. Now at this point, if you did have an EGR pipe, go ahead and get that reinstalled, and then we're going to move to this breather hose assembly right here, which is one of the longer hoses with a 90-degree fitting and a short hose on the end. Go ahead and route this end of that hose underneath your intake manifold. I'm also going to go behind our intercooler piping, and then that is going to route towards the top port of the three on your AOS, and this little short hose right here is going to go into the fitting that you removed your other breather hose from earlier in the video. So this is the shorter end of the hose I was talking about. You're going to need to get that down in there and onto the port. It's kind of a pain in the ass to get in there because there isn't much room to work with, but once you got that on there, go ahead and zip tie that up and get that tightened, and then we'll work on the other end. I've got the other side of that hose routed back by the firewall right in front of the brake lines all the way across, and then we have it connected to this top port right here, and then we will get it secured with a zip tie. Now we're going to take the hose that we threaded into the top of the AOS, and earlier, if you remember, we took this hose off of the PCV valve and put a 90-degree fitting onto it. This is where that hose is going to connect. For that 90-degree fitting I was just talking about, I found it easier to just take this out of the OEM PCV hose and then install it into the AOS hose first and get that zip tied, and then it's a lot easier to install this back into the PCV hose rather than the other way around. Once you have that hose connected to the 90-degree angle fitting, you can then zip tie it into place like I have here, and then we have one hose left. The last hose is this Y hose here, which has two short hoses on the end. Those two hoses are going to go to these two ports here, and the other side of the hose is going to run down to the port on the turbo inlet that the breather hose we took off earlier in the video went to. So once we have this connected, we get that zip tied into place, and we are set. Almost forgot to mention the shorter of these two hoses goes to this port right here, which is the closer one to the strut tower, and then the longer one goes on the outside here. Once you get that last hose installed, it's just a matter of getting everything put back together and reinstalled. If you did lose some coolant when you pulled that line off of the turbo, you will want to top off the coolant and bleed the system. Otherwise, if you didn't lose any coolant, you should be good to go. Just make sure you double check everything once you're done with the install. Also, my hands are pretty beat up, so I recommend you guys definitely wear gloves so you don't cut the out of your hands. What else? It is somewhat of a labor-intensive install, not so much difficult, but it is time-consuming, so plan accordingly. It shouldn't take you more than a weekend, though, unless you really screw something up. That being said, I got to wrap things up here, and I'll see you guys next time.